Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to GDB Selects. Man, it might be recency bias, but I thought round 22 was one of the more exciting rounds of the entire season so far. Most games really do have a lot on the line right now, which I suppose is why. But man, it is such a great time to be a fan of rugby league. I hope you too have been enjoying the footy. Let's get stuck into my tips and predictions for round 23. But before we do that, let's as always look back at last week. Alright, so last week I really thought we were on for a near perfect week last week. In hindsight, tipping the Broncos to beat the Bulldogs was the wrong choice. I certainly didn't expect a performance like that, but certainly season form so far, the Bulldogs were the better side. The Dolphins were really disappointing against the Titans in a bit of a low-scoring game there. And then the Bunnies couldn't get up for their season-defining game against the Raiders, going down and basically putting a line through this season. Still running at almost 60% for the year though, and only a few tips behind some of the upper guys in the tipping comp. And most of those tips coming from backing the Warriors, so that is the pain of being a Warriors fan in tipping comps when they don't have a great year, but still can't complain with nearly 60%. And speaking of that tipping comp, Cornish-Hua and Manawatu Turbo still the two to catch in the comp with 106 and 104 points respectively. Sort of building a bit of a gap there. I mean, there are still plenty of people in with the chance over the last 6 weeks of the competition. But they have certainly maintained that spot for weeks and weeks now, if not months. So congratulations to both of you guys. Good luck with your tips for this week. Here are my tips and predictions for round 22. Alright, round 22 gets underway on Thursday night with the last placed West Tigers taking on the 6th placed North Queensland Cowboys at Leichhardt Oval. Alright, starting first with the Tigers. They were brave against the Warriors but couldn't return home with the 2 points, going down 16 points to 28. Defensively, I thought the Tigers were pretty good and managed to absorb a ton of pressure, especially in their opening 20 minutes. I thought though that they did lack a bit of punch through the middle, which didn't allow them the field position they needed to score points, and they once again came up with some pretty ordinary unforced errors. And in terms of teams list for the Tigers this week, Luke Laulili, Stafford Toa and David Clemmer are all in doubt, while Adam Dewey is likely to return and be available for selection this week. And as for North Queensland, they had to dig deep against the Sharks at home, but managed to win 30 points to 22. The Cowboys certainly missed Ruben Cotter for 3/4 of that game, but I thought their back five was really strong, as well as their two halves, and really managed to keep themselves on the front foot. The Cowboys have certainly turned a bit of a corner with their defense, and were able to continuously turn away the Sharks for multiple sets in a row. After a really disappointing start to the season, the Cowboys are now beginning to click into gear and just at the right time. And in terms of teams list for the Cowboys, Ruben Cotter was unfortunately knocked out in that very sickening clash, so will be subject to at least an 11-day stand-down period on the sidelines. Jason Taumalolo, he also suffered a suspected fractured cheekbone, so will be sidelined this week as well. Some good news for the Cowboys though is Helam Lukey is listed to return from a hamstring injury this week. Alright, looking at the two sides head to head, who could forget what happened last time they met at Leichhardt, with the Tigers recording an unbelievable 66 to 18 point win. West also have a very incredible record against the Cowboys at Leichhardt. They've won 9 of the last 10 games there. Overall though, the Cowboys have won 4 of the last 5 meetings. The live odds, thanks to our friends at SpinBet, do have the Cowboys at $1.33 favourites, with the Tigers coming back at $3.40. The points line is currently 10.5. Now, if you do want to check out SpinBet, you can scan that QR code on screen now, which will set you up perfectly with everything you need. We do some exclusive boosted odds, so if you do want to be a part of that, join our Discord server as well by scanning the opposite QR code. People in our Discord do get to choose what odds and markets we boost each week, so basically you can have your say and then jump onto SpinBet to get access to those markets. So big thanks to SpinBet and a big shout out to all of our Discord members as well. Alright, fairly straightforward one for me in this one. I do think the Cowboys win and win well. They've certainly clicked into gear, and unfortunately the Tigers are just the Tigers. Alright, moving now to the first of 2 games on Friday. Starting first with the 12th placed NZ Warriors taking on the 16th placed Parramatta Eels over here in Auckland at Go Media Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Warriors, they managed to produce a scrappy, unconvincing win against the Tigers last week, 28 points to 16. The Warriors, they dominated field position and possession in their opening half, but lacked connection on attack, unable to make the most of their chances. Once again, Mitch Barnett, the likes of Adam Fanua-Blake and Dylan Walker were unbelievable through the middle, and RTS was as dangerous as ever in his preferred position of fullback. They've certainly been dealt some cruel injury blows this season, especially in the halves and back department, but they do need to find more from their offensive players to back up that really strong platform and hard work of their big middlemen. Now, in terms of teams list for the Wars this week, Marcelo Montoya, Sean Johnson, Chance Nickel-Klukstar, and Tane Tuapiki should be cleared to return this week. So some massive ins after a few weeks of very low on troops. Jackson Ford, though, he suffered a knee injury last week and may be in doubt. Alright, and as for the Eels, they still haven't been able to win a game since May, losing to the Melbourne Storm 32 points to 14 at Amy Park. Parramatta had the Lions' share of field position and possession for a majority of that match, but couldn't convert it into points. It goes without saying, but the Eels, they are really missing the X factor, game management and speed of Mitchell Moses. Dylan Brown, he obviously tries, really hard and has moments of brilliance, but he's proven this year that he has struggled at times without his halves partner. Now, in terms of teams list for the Eels, Kalma Tuolangi is due back from a thumb injury either this week or next, while Mike Acevo, he isn't listed to return until next week in round 23. Alright, looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Eels, they have won 4 of the last 5 games. The live odds currently have the Warriors at $1.31 favourites, with the Eels bouncing back at $3.65. The points line is rather large at 11.5 points. Ooh, the Eels, they are beyond due for a win, but I am going to take the Warriors at home just by 1 to 12 points. The Warriors have been far from clinical on attack. They have certainly shown moments of, improved defense and signs of what they showed last year, but they just can't seem to click into gear, mainly probably due to players coming and going throughout the majority of the past 10 weeks. But regardless, I do think the Warriors can beat the Eels, who are in a horrible hole right now. So come on, up the Wars, 1 to 12. Alright, and the final game on Friday has the 8th place Dolphins taking on the 3rd place Sydney Roosters at HBF Park, all the way over in Perth. Alright, starting first with the Finns, they gave up a first half lead to the Titans, going down 21 points to 14 at home. The Finns, they started fast and looked like they were going to run away with it, but were out enthused in the second half and botched a few tries that certainly could have changed momentum. They finished the game with just 43% of possession, and it was a really disappointing result given their recent run of form, which obviously now puts their maiden berth in the finals in jeopardy. Now, in terms of teams list for Redcliffe this week, Kurt Donahue, he does return from suspension, and aside from that, they should be the same 1 to 17. And as for the Roosters, they cemented their place in the top 4 with a highly entertaining 34 to 30 point victory over the Manly Sea Eagles. The Chooks, they came flying out of the blocks as they have done so often this year after a loss, scoring 4 tries in the opening 20 minutes, thanks largely in part to a vintage James Tedesco performance. Despite conceding nearly 30 points and ending the game with only a 4-point winning margin, the Roosters' defense was absolutely outstanding, only seeing 40% of possession and making over 110 more tackles than the Sea Eagles, which is just incredible and certainly great signs as the finals series looms. Now, in terms of teams list for the Chooks, Junior Polgar, he returns from suspension this week, while Joey Manu is expected to be named to return from that hand fracture that he suffered back in round 17. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, this is only the 3rd time they've met, with both sides winning 1 apiece. In terms of stats around Perth, this is the first time the Roosters will play over in Perth since 1995, while the Dolphins lost to the Newcastle Knights at Optus Stadium last year. The live odds currently have the Roosters at $1.33 favourites, with the Dolphins coming back at $3.40, and the points line is currently 10.5. Ooh, this should be a bloody good game. I think the Dolphins will really want to put on a performance to right the wrongs from last week, but I really do like the Roosters here, so I am going to take the Chooks 13+. I think the Roosters are on a real tear right now. They're closing in on the top 2 teams in the Panthers and the Storm. Defensively, I thought, like I said, they were really good in stages against the Sea Eagles, with 3 of their 4 tries coming from intercepts. And the Finns are just lacking a bit of oomph right now, which is the same thing that happened last season, which is very concerning. So I do think the Roosters win, and win well. So for me, Roosters 13+. Alright, moving now to the first of 3 games on Saturday this week, starting first with the 14th placed Gold Coast Titans taking on the 13th placed and struggling Brisbane Broncos at Cbus Super Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Titans, they managed to overturn a halftime deficit to defeat the Dolphins 21 points to 14. The Gold Coast, they were far from their best in that first half, but they came out firing in the second following what must have been an all-time spray from Des Hasler. Phil Sami, Keanu Kenny, Mo Fotuaika and David Fafita were incredible and put up some really great numbers, and Jaden Campbell once again had his fingerprints all over the Titans' tries, setting up 3 of their 4 4-pointers. The Titans, they are really finding their feet now, and although their 2024 campaign might be over for this year, they've certainly shown some great signs for 2025. Now in terms for the Titans this week, big end with AJ Brimson expected to return. Also, Jamin Jolliffe is named to make his return this week as well. And as for the Broncos, their season is all but over after suffering a huge loss at the hands of the Bulldogs at home, 41 points to 16. It felt like the Broncos were almost shocked by Canterbury's style of play and were unable to contain the expansive style of play. Defensively, Brisbane's edges were really poor and were forced to play on the back foot by the Dogs and couldn't contain the ball movement or their opposition wingers. Certainly a very disappointing performance from the Broncos, especially as it was at home and in front of nearly 40-odd thousand people with their season on the line. There's certainly some issues there, maybe a bit of hangover from Origin, I'm not too sure, but I think it's a little bit too little, too late for the Broncos. Now, in terms of teams list for Brisbane, Dean Mariner, he left the field with a knee injury, but coach Kevy Walters did say after the match that it wasn't too serious, so he may be named again this week. Good news though is Brendan Piakura is expected to return this week, alongside Fletcher Baker, who is also eyeing a return. Alright, looking at the two sides head to head, the Broncos, they were upset by the Titans earlier this season in a back and forth points shootout, 36 points to 24. The Titans, they've only beaten the Broncos 3 times in 10 meetings at Cbus Super Stadium. Ooh, now this is a coin flip. I'm going to take the Broncos 1-12 because this is literally must win for Brisbane. Certainly the Titans have been in better form over recent weeks, but Brisbane just have so much strike that they should be nowhere near 13th or 14th on the ladder. They should easily be in that 8, entrenched in the 8, with the likes of Reynolds, Harsh, Walsh, Mam, Staggs, Ricky, Peck. I mean, you could go on. They have the roster to be a top 4 side. For whatever reason this season it hasn't worked. I do think they can beat the Titans this week to right the wrongs from earlier this season, so I'm going the Broncos 1-12. Alright, moving now to the second game on Saturday, starting first with the first placed Melbourne Storm taking on the 10th placed St George Illawarra Dragons at Amy Park. Alright, starting first with the Storm, their premiership stock continued to rise, completely outclassing the Eels 32 points to 14. Melbourne were on the wrong end of almost every key stat, but showed incredible resilience to continuously turn away Parramatta and just as easily turn the defence into attack from long range. Will Warbrick has been an absolute revelation and continues to impress as he finds his feet in the game of rugby league, running for over 300 metres with 4 line breaks and a 4-pointer. Now, I've certainly been critical of the Storm, that is no secret, but you've got to give them credit. They are a marvel of a club, and the fact that they can be this consistent for such a long period of time needs to be studied, researched and put in a museum because it is really one of a kind. Now, in terms of teams list for Melbourne this week, Cam Munster, he made it through his 50-minute stint, so should be named to start this week. Marion Seve, young Tonamatapea, Alec McDonald and Christian Welsh are all listed to return this week as well. And as for the poor old Dragons, they were completely outclassed, mainly by Nathan Cleary, but also the Penrith Panthers, 46 points to 10. The Saints were banged up through the middle of the park, with only a handful of players making more than 100 run meters, and they certainly weren't aided by Ben Hunt, who had a very mixed night with the boot and in general. Collectively, they were nowhere near the standard of the Panthers, only completing at 66% with 13 errors and just 3 line breaks to Penrith's 10. In terms of teams list for the Saints this week, Big Ben Murdoch-Masila suffered what looked to be a knee injury in that game's dying stages, so will likely be unavailable this week. Matt Fine, he suffered a head knock and wasn't able to return against the Panthers, so will obviously be monitored this week and may be in doubt. Alright, looking at the two sides head to head, the Melbourne Storm, they have won 5 of the last 6 meetings. The poor old Dragons, they have never, that's right, they have never beaten the Storm at Amy Park in 6 attempts. The live odds, thanks to our friends over at Spinbet, currently have the Storm at $1.14 favourites, with the Dragons coming back at $6. The line is, in my opinion, and maybe I'm an idiot, but I think 17.5 points is very, very inflated. I think the Dragons will need to show a bit of fight after last week. And the Storm certainly have had their moments, but 17.5 points just sounds like a lot. Having said that, I am just going to take the Storm here by 1 to 12 points. Like I've said just minutes ago, I have been critical of the Storm, but they have certainly just continued to defy what seems, I guess, possible and logical. The Dragons, though, they have shown moments of brilliance this season. They obviously were far from their best last week against the Dragons. I do think Shane Flanagan will get them up for this game, having never beaten the Storm in Amy Park. But I do think the Storm will have too much class and too much speed, especially around the edges. So for me, Melbourne 1 to 12. Alright, and the final game of Super Saturday this week has the 4th placed Cronulla Sharks taking on the 15th placed South Sydney Rabbitohs at PointsBet Stadium. Alright, starting first with Cronulla, the Sharks. They've only won 2 of their past 8 games and came up short against the Cowboys in Townsville, 30 points to 22. The Sharks, they made it really hard for themselves in that first half with plenty of penalties and errors, but considering they had a man spend time in the sin bin, they were still right in that contest at 10 points to 18 at the break. Cronulla had all the momentum late but were unable to match the energy of the Cowboys and failed to manage the game, I guess, quite as well as North Queensland did, especially down the stretch. Now, in terms of teams list for the Sharks, a massive in with Will Kennedy returning from suspension this week, so obviously a very crucial part to Cronulla's success and will certainly make a big difference to their performance. And as for the poor old Rabbitohs, their finals hopes were ended after suffering a disappointing loss to the Canberra Raiders, 32 points to 12. The Bunnies were really slow out of the blocks and lacked the same energy, intensity and desperation as the Raiders, finding themselves down by almost 20 points in 20 minutes. They were plagued by injuries which certainly didn't help, and if you look at the numbers, they were almost, well, you could say almost the better side statistically, but they just blew the start and couldn't find their way back through the Raiders line. And in terms of teams list for the Bunny, a big blow not only for South Sydney fans but also for rugby league fans, with Alex Johnson suffering a season-ending Achilles injury. Cody Walker, he also left the field late and will undergo scans on his calf this week. Good news for the Bunnies though is Cam Murray returns from suspension this week, and Richie Kenner and Dean Hawkins are also both expected to be available for selection. Looking at the two sides head to head, it's been really evenly matched in recent times, with both sides winning 5 apiece in their last 10. The Sharks, though, they have a really great record at home, winning 7 of the last 10 games. And the live odds do agree with the Sharks, currently $1.33 favourites, and the Bunnies coming back at $3.25. The line is currently 9.5 points. This could have been a very, very interesting game had the Bunnies won last week, but I do think, given that their season is now well and truly over, they may be a little bit flat this week, while the Sharks will certainly need to prove they are still worthy of that top 4 spot. So I do think the Sharks win and win well. So I am going to take Cronulla here by 13 plus. I think there's just too much at stake for the Sharks after, sort of 6 disappointing results in their last 8. They'll need a big showing here, and if the Bunnies are without Walker, Mitchell, and AJ, I do think the Sharks can really make a big statement here. So for me, Sharks 13 plus. Alright, moving now to the first of 2 games on Sunday this week, starting first with the 2nd place Penrith Panthers taking on the 11th place Newcastle Knights at Bluebet Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Panthers, they emphatically avenged their round 13 loss to the Dragons, thumping the Saints 46 points to 10. Penrith, they looked great with Jerome Luai at number 7, but my word, they are a completely different side with Nathan Cleary back in it. Cleary looked like he was in a league of his own almost, playing against, school kids to a degree, bagging his 5th career hat-trick with a whopping 240 run meters as well as 2 other try assists. Despite currently being below the Melbourne Storm on the ladder, it's pretty clear that the Panthers are still the gold standard on their day and front runners to go all the way once again. Now, in terms of teams list for the Panthers, Dane Laurie failed his HIA, so could be in doubt for this week's game as well, while James Fisher-Harris was forced from the field in the opening minutes with what looked to be a groin injury. And as for Newcastle, they had their final bye of the season last week, but the week prior were beaten by the Brisbane Broncos 30 points to 14. The Knights couldn't get onto the board until the final quarter of the match, despite having plenty of opportunities, but offering very little on attack and coming up with some very ordinary 5th play options. Kalen Ponga has been kept pretty quiet upon return, with the Knights almost expecting him to produce some magic rather than, doing what's been working well in his absence, which was, low risk, high percentage plays. Instead, they look a bit flustered and kind of just throw Ponga the ball like, here mate, you do it. The big news though for the Knights is that Bradman Best is unlikely to be named after reigniting that lingering hamstring injury, so a massive blow for the Newcastle Knights. Brodie Jones though and Adam Elliott are both expected to be named this week. Looking at the two sides head to head, Penrith, they have a great record against the Knights, winning an incredible 15 of the last 18 games. They've also won 6 of the last 7 games at Bluebet, dating all the way back until 2014. The Knights also haven't beaten the Panthers since 2018, but they did play to a draw in 2020. Fairly straightforward one for me. I think the Panthers win. I'm going to take Penrith 13+. They are on a tear with Nathan back. Right, and the final game of round 22 has the 5th placed Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs taking on the 9th placed Canberra Raiders at Belmore Sports Ground. Alright, starting first with the Dogs turned on an attacking masterclass against the Broncos, 41 points to 16. The Dogs have built their season to this point on rock solid defence, but last week it was their attacking flair on full display, producing some of the more spectacular tries of the season. Connor Tracy was at his elusive and explosive best, scoring a try and setting up 3 others, while Jarrell Skelton was a late inclusion but made over 300 run meters. In hindsight, the Bulldogs had shown far more consistency than the Broncos this year, but I certainly don't think that even the most die-hard Canterbury fans would have expected a performance like that, especially in enemy territory. Now, in terms of teams list for the Dogs, Stephen Crichton was omitted late due to a rather scary nerve injury he suffered the week prior, so will obviously be monitored to play this week, but it did seem like Cameron Ciraldo was confident he'd be back in the side this week. And as for the Raiders, they ended the Rabbitohs season with an impressive 32-12 point win at home. It was certainly one of the better performances from Ricky's men, especially in the last few weeks, hardly making a mistake in battering the Rabbitohs through the middle. Jamal Fogarty's return couldn't have come at a better time, with his long kicking game one of the best in the competition, regularly producing tries or errors from the opposition. Another standout for me has been Hudson Young, who's been on a bit of a tear in recent weeks, scoring a double against the Warriors and running for 200 metres yesterday with a try and a try assist. In terms of teams list for the Raiders this week, there were no new injuries, I believe, against the Rabbitohs, so I would expect the same 17 this week. Alright, looking at the two sides head to head, the Raiders, they have won 11 of the last 12 games against the Dogs. That includes 9 straight. They met earlier this year in Magic Round, with the Raiders jagging a 24-20 point win. Historically though, the Dogs, they have won 11 of the last 14 games against the Raiders at Belmore. The live odds currently have the Dogs at $1.42 favourites, with the Raiders coming back at $2.90, and the points line is currently 8.5. Ooh, this is certainly a bit more interesting after the performance the Raiders produced yesterday, but I do think the Dogs should get the job done, especially being back at Belmore. That place will be absolutely rammed to the teeth, considering how well the Dogs have done this season, and I don't think there's any way they'll let them down, especially off the back of a massive win against the Broncos. So for me, Doggies 13+. Bang, and just like that, we are done for yet another week. Sorry I took the week off last week. Shit happens, life's busy. You get me. Leave your tips in the comments, leave a like on the video, hit subscribe if you haven't already, join our Discord, check out SpinBet, say hi to your mother, and I'll see you in the next one.